How's it going, everyone, and welcome to Form Ranch. Now today I'm pretty excited to be talking to you about the ATRO-8, which is a 1 to 8 power first focal plane LPVO brought to you by Accufire Technologies. So of course I'm going to cover some quick technical specifications to this optic. I do want to touch on the build quality of this optic, and then I'm going to talk about my experiences behind this optic, both at the range, zeroing, mounting, all that good stuff. So stick around, we're about to dive into the review of the Accufire Technologies ATRO-8. So now, like I said, it is a 1 to 8 power optic, and that's pretty incredible that optics are, in general, advancing the way they are. The fact that in a package this size, you can get both a 1 power optic and an 8 power optic. And that's what LPVO, for those that don't know, stands for. It's low power variable optic. And what that really gives you is a ton of flexibility. Now, quick disclaimer, no two LPVO lines are truly made the same. Sometimes you can truly get what you pay for, because although they can call them a 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, even 1 to 10 power now, not all of them are necessarily a true 1 power. Some of them will come in with what is really a 1.1 or 1.2 magnification, which for some, myself included, is somewhat of a deal breaker. I really want it to feel like a reflex sight, similar to what I have mounted at 45 degrees. And if this is driving some of you crazy and want to know why I have that, I will cover that later in the video. Nonetheless, when you're behind the ATRO-8, it really does feel like a 1 power optic. There's very, very minimal distortion or optical magnification whatsoever. It is very, very close to a true 1 power optic. And again, me being kind of a stickler for that, I've had no issues. It hasn't bothered me whatsoever. When I'm behind it, it really does feel like a 1 power optic, similar to like an EOTech or an aim point, or again, this micro red dot I have canted at 45 degrees. And you're able to be incredibly fast and reflective at close range. Now, on the flip side, if you crank this thing all the way to 8 power, that gives you a huge potential in terms of how far you can reach out. Now, for example, I was able to successfully use this at steel at 500 yards, even with the 5.56 platform. 8 power is more than enough to see that steel target at 500 yards. You can definitely go out further. Unfortunately, where I was plinking around, that was the limit of what I could shoot. But 8 power gives you more magnification than I think you'll give it credit for. And I don't necessarily think you need anything more than 8 power for something common like a 5.56 platform. Now, the reason behind that is that the higher the magnification range that you can get on an LPVO, you have what's known as an eye box, which is essentially how centered your pupil needs to be behind these optics. So the higher that magnification range goes, the less tolerances that are allowed for that eye box. Therefore, it's kind of a trade-off. So me personally, I think 8 power is probably the sweet spot to cap it out. Now, in terms of trade-offs as well, Accufire, to my understanding, has opted for a 30mm tube to save on weight. Now, some of you may be familiar with the fact that 34mm tubes are slowly gaining popularity. They're being seen as kind of more and more common, whereas 1-inch tubes used to be kind of the standard. 30mm tubes, in my opinion, have now become kind of the standard. So now what do you gain when we're talking about a 34mm tube, a 30mm tube, and a 1-inch tube? So again, just so you kind of understand trade-offs, especially when speaking this optic. Well, it's just simple physics that the larger your tube diameter is, the more light that can be passed through. But it also comes with a trade-off of more size, which comes with more mass and weight on top of your rifle. So that's one thing to consider. The other advantage to a larger tube diameter is that you have more adjustment within your optic in terms of elevation and windage. But nonetheless, in this 30mm tube that we're talking about here, you do get 10 mils of travel, which translates to roughly 34 MOA if I'm doing that calculation right. So that is more than enough for a 1 to 8 power optic. But now let's circle back to the choice on this optic to go with the 30mm tube size, which in my opinion is again kind of that sweet spot for an LPVO. Because I don't necessarily think you need the extra elevation adjustment on an LPVO, because I don't believe these are really suited to be precision optics. I'm not saying you can't be precise and you can't hit things at a far distance, but it's not geared to be specifically for long range use. It's geared to be flexible at both close range and far range.
Impact. Impact.
The optic alone comes in at 550 grams, which translates to roughly 1.2 pounds. So you're getting an incredible amount of flexibility while only sacrificing the gain of 1.2 pounds on top of your rig. And speaking of adding things to your overall setup, I guess this is an appropriate time to quick address why I have opted to have a 45-degree offset red dot while being paired with something like a 1 to 8 power, because you're probably wondering, well, what's the point if you can go down to 1 power? So my personal preference on any serious setup I have that's not just a range toy is that I like to have a backup optic of some form on the rifle. So you'll notice I don't currently have a set of iron sights on this. Therefore, the primary purpose of this red dot is to serve as a backup to this should I drop it or bang it on something and the optic goes down in a critical moment. Now, a critical moment can be anything from home defense, competitive shooting in the middle of a match, it could be during a hunt, right? So this is one of my setups that I don't just plink around solely at the range. I may use it in a competitive setting. It would surely do the job in a home defense scenario, etc., because I definitely trust the ATRO-8 to handle those scenarios. But speaking of breaking this optic, let's go ahead and touch on the build quality. Now, that's probably the thing I noticed absolutely first when I took this out of the box, was the build quality was absolutely phenomenal. Not only is the finish on this optic just feels really high quality and premium, but it just felt solid, it felt sturdy. And there's the little details on this optic. So like under these scope caps, just the kind of knurling that they added on the diopter adjustment, it's just, you know, it's the little details sometimes. Now on top of that, there's knurling on the turrets, and hopefully you can hear this, but oh my gosh, the click on these turrets. It is so tactile. You really know when you're making those adjustments, and not all optics have that. So like this Vortex back here, it's a great optic, but I mean, it just doesn't really do it the same way that the ATRO-8 does. Now, so that's one thing, like I said, it just felt like it was designed from the ground up by actual shooters for actual shooters. Now, speaking of durability, Accufire has a no BS warranty where if you break it for any reason, you're covered, they will replace it. In fact, they even ask that you describe how you broke it so they can further improve their design, which is pretty cool to see a company doing. So not only is that taking care of us as consumers and outdoor enthusiasts who can be rough on our toys, but it goes to show that Accufire actually stands behind and believes in their products. So that kind of speaks for itself. So I'll let you take that into account as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about the optical clarity of the ATRO-8. I was very pleased. I really have no complaints on the overall clarity. Things are sharp, the contrast is good, there's no weird skewing of colors. There's a very, very little amount of distortion to my eye when you are at the 1 power, but it's really only detectable when you're about 10 feet in. For me, I notice a little bit of warping, and honestly, it's kind of adjusted with the diopter. And I truly believe that this is happening due to my astigmatism, but for me, having astigmatism at about 10 feet in, I do get a little bit of bending of light through this optic at very, very close range. Past 10 feet, I notice that effect pretty much drops off completely and I don't notice any visible distortion. Okay, let's talk about the reticle real quick.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Play with the...
Does that light up?
Yeah, it does, so check it out. And then, that's what I'm saying, you can use it as a red dot.
Wow.
Almost. Because it's 1 to 8. So you do have a nice circle that draws your eye to the reticle with a dot in the center to give you that pinpoint accuracy. Additionally, you do have some ballistic drop hash marks on the reticle itself. And again, being first focal plane, as you zoom into the reticle, the ballistic drops do stay consistent. So again, it is in mils. So if you know your zero well and you know your ballistic data of the rifle, you can again effectively use this as a precision optic to a certain range, because you do not have, you know, it's not a full-on Horus reticle in here. It's not a very overly busy reticle, but it's just about right to draw your eye to it and still effectively use it at a decent range. Now, the reticle is illuminated. It has 12 different settings, including 0 for off. It goes all the way up to setting 11. Now, there's not a offsetting in between the brightness adjustments, which for some may be kind of annoying, but for me, it's not a big deal because I'm not planning on using this a whole lot at night. And when I do, I think 1 is probably strong enough to get the job done without making your eyes adjust to the illuminated reticle. And for daytime use, I'm personally always going to use it on setting 11. And that's kind of leading into my really only minor complaint about this optic as of yet, is that on full 11 power, even with a fresh battery, I don't think it's as bright as it could or should be. Now, I'm not saying you can't see the red on the reticle illuminating, but it's not going to jump out at you the way you can make an actual red dot at 1 power jump out at you. The reticle is still easy to pick up to my eye, and I was able to be incredibly fast and accurate with it, but it would be nicer if they had the capability to make it stupid bright if you want to. I'm not saying you should, but it is somewhat limited on the brightness that you can make this optic. Now, the overall reliability of this optic has shown no issues whatsoever. It's held at 0 very well. I've thrown it in the back of my truck. It's been bounced around while off-road on my ranch, and I haven't necessarily been super gentle on it. I've put several hundred rounds through this optic. I'd like to have put more, but ammo being the way it is, I feel like that's a fairly high round count for the time being to test this out. Now, I even had the opportunity to test it in really cold weather when Texas had its crazy little winter storm the other week. And I will say that I was pretty pleased to see that not only did it not affect the electronics of the optic, there was not fogging inside the optic whatsoever, and it was overall good to go. I've made adjustments to the elevation when shooting at those ranges up to 500 yards, and when switching it back, I still maintain my 0 at 100 yards, so the tracking of the turrets are good, because there's really no point to having the rapidly adjustable turrets if you can't trust that it's going to return back to 0. Now, I do want to also touch on the overall turret design, which anytime you have a optic that has tactical turrets that let you very quickly adjust your windage and elevation, you need to consider how the system is implemented. So in the scenario of this optic here, which is a Nikon, you have, again, tactical turrets ready to twist and adjust your windage and elevation, but there's nothing preventing those turrets from moving. Whereas on the Accufire, like I mentioned, you have to lift up to prevent accidental adjustments to your 0. Now, again, one thing that became a nightmare on this Nikon for me that made me absolutely hate this optic, and that's the reason it's no longer on a rifle, is it's very easy to lift up. This one can rotate, it can set back down, which begs the question that, let's say you find it and it's on 18 like it is right now. I don't know if it was twisted in my rifle case. I don't know if it was lifted up, rotated, and then set back down. I have no idea where my 0 is, so I could not depend on this optic at all. I literally had to baby it and be so careful not to adjust my 0 or literally tape the damn thing down. The Accufire, the only way to, again, adjust the 0 is to lift up, to turn. It's nice and stiff, tactile, so it really can't be done by accident. I'll be surprised if it can. But to reset the 0, you actually have to remove a screw in the top, manually pull the turret off, and line it up with the 0, set it down, attach the screw. So there's no way you can accidentally lose your 0. So Accufire has you covered there. So again, just a little data point to consider when you're looking at any optic that has a tactical turret system. Make sure it's done right so it doesn't become an absolute nightmare for you rather than the convenience it's supposed to be. The other really nice thing right out of the box is that Accufire does give you a throw lever that is removable should you want to. You do have nice knurling on the focus adjustment here, and it is smooth, but it's not so smooth that it can easily be bumped once again. So you're covered there. Your magnification is not going to change without you noticing. Overall, I think it's just where it needs to be in terms of not being overly tight but not overly loose. It definitely does not move around whatsoever when firing. And I personally opt to leave the little throw lever there, which is quick and easy to index. It goes 180 degrees around the optic, so there's no going too far and then it starts getting too close to your rifle to where you can't get underneath it. It stops exactly where it should. Now on the rear of the optic, you do have your diopter, which again has some nice knurling, that attention to detail. It is nice and smooth as well. And it does have a little index on top so you know how much adjustment you've made. So if you need to change it slightly from shooter to shooter, you can quick set it back to where it was for your eye as well. Again, it's really just the little details that really impressed me on this optic. They really did think of almost everything they possibly could on this. Now the optic does use a standard 2032 watch style battery, and the battery compartment itself is sealed with an O-ring to further protect you from the elements and keep the reliability and overall durability of the optic up. Now they advertise roughly 3¼ to 3.3 inches of eye relief when behind this. I would say that's a very fair assessment. I've had no issues with eye relief. I honestly haven't really noticed having to get too close to the optic, which tells me that the eye relief is more than enough and it's very comfortable to get behind. So overall, I've really enjoyed this optic. It's been reliable to date. had no issues in it losing zero. The overall build quality and just feel of this optic is very, very premium in nature. And given the flexibility that this optic provides, I think it's definitely earned its right on top of my AR-15 platform because it really gives you the best of both worlds in one very reasonable package. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this optic or picking one up for yourself, I will have a link in the description below. Definitely go check out Accufire. They are a Texas-based company. I absolutely love when Texas-based companies send me products to test out that are worth recommending to you guys. Highly recommend the Accufire ATRO-8. So again, link in the description below. And I'd really like to thank you for taking the time to stop by the 4MR Ranch YouTube channel and watch this video. And as always, guys, have a good one.